Thank you, Deanna, so much for that introduction. And Scott and Deanna really mean a lot to me, and you'll find out something very special, hopefully, that I don't forget to talk about later about Deanna. Something really special that she did for me also concerns Matt, and he doesn't even know it. So my name, if you ever want to say it, Deanna was very clear, and she said it perfectly correct, except that my husband's family, his dad was German, his mother was Native American, and we're all from Southern Ohio, where got a lot of Appalachian rednecks, and so they never pronounced the CH in his family. So because you're all adults, well, almost everybody's an adult, I'm going to trust you with this. Now, my high school students, I would never tell them how to pronounce my name like this, but I always tell people Schweinsberg, like pig's town. That's how you can remember it. High school students would have a ball with that, so yeah, I don't say that. You can go to the next slide, Matt. So how many of you have heard the story of King Nebuchadnezzar and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Remember that story in the Bible? So I'll give you the Teresa Schweinsberg paraphrased edition. So the king, had made the golden idol for people to bow down to it. And these 3 teenage boys who were full of God and full of his spirit, they weren't going to bow down because they believed in the one true God, and they weren't going to bow down to a golden idol. And so they didn't bow. Every day when the trumpet blew and they were supposed to bow, these 3 teenage boys didn't bow down. Well, there's always a tattletale in the school, a tattletale around somewhere that's waiting for you to mess up so they can tell somebody. And so there was a tattletale that went to the king and said, King, your decree is not being obeyed by these 3 teenage boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You need to do something about that. So the king said, bring them in. And he stands the boys in front of him, and he said, you need to bow. If you don't bow, you're going to be thrown in this fiery furnace. It's hot, and you'll be burned up. And they said to him something in the next slide, Daniel 3:18, that has run true in my life a lot. And what they said to him is, you got to pray. Sometimes I go through and I speak and I'm fine, and sometimes the Spirit is just so real here, and I can feel it this morning that I get really teary-eyed, and then you can't understand me, so I hope you can understand me. But the boys looked at the king and they said, King, our God will deliver us from that furnace. They believe that. But even if he doesn't, oh King, we still won't bow because we'll still serve him anyway. And so there are moments in our lives when we stand at that crossroad. What are we going to do? Even if he doesn't, what are we going to do? So the next slide, Matt. Even if he does not get me out of the mess that I'm in, if he doesn't save my husband, if you have an unsaved spouse, I grew up with a mother that was saved and a father that was unsaved that we prayed for 29 years. Even if he doesn't bring me some financial help right now, what am I going to do? I'm going to lose my house. I'm going to lose my car. Even if he doesn't heal my marriage, we're on the brink of divorce. God, what are you doing? Save my marriage. Even if he doesn't bring my children back to God, even if he doesn't help me get a new job that I need, if he doesn't heal me of cancer, if he doesn't give me the new house I want or heal a family member, there are always crossroads in our lives where we have to say, am I going to trust God even if he doesn't? Am I going to believe in him? Am I going to serve him even if he doesn't do what I want? Next slide. So at the age of 13, I was having a lot of female problems. Sorry, Matt. And I have picture not available because did anyone ever go through a really awkward and ugly stage? Your school pictures those are the school pictures that you hide or you rip them up if your mom buys them because you really wanted her to have them retaken. Well, there's no photo available. You know how in your books, no photo available? Mine's not available for this age, but went to the doctor and he told me at 13 that I probably wasn't going to have any children. That's a young age to think that all your dreams are shattered. I was the little girl who always played with the baby dolls because I wanted to be a mommy. I pretended I was a mommy all the time. And to hear that was hard. He didn't say absolutely not. He said probably. And so I held on to that probably from the age of 13 until I got married. Next slide. And so I went through college. Olivia's here, and I've been so excited to meet Olivia because my undergraduate degree was in deaf education and elementary education. So I taught most of my special education career in that 41 years was teaching deaf students. And so I signed fluently, and I was excited because Olivia signed, so we had a little conversation back there in sign language. And then I met my husband my last year of college. And we got married, and as Deanna said, we sang. That's how we met. They were looking for another girl singer. A girl had left the group, and so they, had known that I sang with the other girl in a group in a different group, and so they knew our voices blended, and so they asked me to kind of fill in, and I was, filling in the whole time I was in college because I was 5 hours away and couldn't come home all the time, but on the weekends that someone could come and get me or I could drive and meet them, then I sang in the group. And he was the bass player and also the MC of the group. And you can see, very handsome, very spiritual. He just, in the services, he would introduce songs or he would say something and just always brought it to such a spiritual place. And I just thought, that's the man of God I'm going to marry. And so we got married. As soon as I graduated, I did my student teaching and finished up May 13th, and we got married on May 16th. So you can imagine the wedding planning while I was finishing college and doing student teaching. And what was I thinking? I have no idea. I was thinking, I'm so in love, and I just want to be married to this man. And so we had a lot going on that summer. And one thing that we talked about, and I started teaching, first-year teacher right there. I started teaching immediately. We got married in May, and I started teaching in August. And so one thing that we had talked about even prior to marriage, I wanted to be honest with him, and I knew he wanted kids, and I wanted to tell him, there's a probability that I won't be able to have children. He said, that's fine, we'll do what we need to do. And I said, well, if I can't, I definitely want to adopt a baby because, I don't think I can live my life and not be a mother to a child. And so about 5 months after we were married, we decided, even though I was teaching my first year, everything that was going on, we decided to start trying to have a baby because I knew from friends that suffered from infertility that they won't really do a lot until you've gone 3 years and not been able to have a baby. And so we were 23 and 25 when we got married. If you add 3 years of trying and not having success, then going through treatments for another few years, that would put us past 30s and then into 30s. And then when you found out that you were going to have to adopt, so many friends that I knew were on adoption lists for 6, 7, 8 years. So we would be over 40 by the time we had a child. So I said, let's start trying now. Let's go ahead and start trying 5 months into marriage. Well, that doctor totally fooled me because I got pregnant immediately. And I mean immediately. I started having all the symptoms. And so you can change slide, Matt. So there I am, so happy that I was pregnant 5 months into marriage, but a little worried because, we hadn't even been married a year. But I lost that baby by miscarriage at 13 weeks. And so I'm thinking, okay, not only may I not be able to have children, but I might not be able to carry them. And so we tried again for 3 more years and had 3 years of infertility, no success at all. And then suddenly pregnant again. And when I went to the doctor for my first exam, and I know you all are reading that, but I walked in, the doctor took me to an exam room. He examined me for my very first time to be there. And I could tell halfway through the exam that the atmosphere became very serious with both him and the nurse. And I knew something was wrong. You have that sense that something's just not right. And so they sat me down afterwards and talked to me. And he said, I'm not a specialist in this area, but I found a mass. It's encasing the outside of your uterus, and it's attached to the uterus. He said, Hippocratic Oath says, I have to save your life first. The baby's not going to be viable because you're not that far along. You're probably about 8 weeks along. He said, we have to save you. We can't save the baby. He said, I'm going to need to call in specialists because I've never had a case like this. I think that it's possibly malignant by the way that it feels and the size of it. And he said, if we put you through treatments, it's going to, you'll have a fetal demise because the baby can't handle chemotherapy or radiation. If we don't do anything, that mass it's so hard, it's going to stay there, and it's going to restrict the baby's growth. It's not going to be able to grow anyway. And so pregnancy number 2 was not looking good either. I'm going to talk to you more about that later if you'll bear with me. And then pregnancy 3, 8 years of infertility. Now, after those 3 years, we hadn't really done a lot during the 3 years except, wait. But during those 8 years after that second pregnancy, I had a lot to think about. I had a lot going on. I had several surgeries. During that 8 years, we lived, as Deanna said, in southern Ohio, but Columbus, Ohio is in the center of the state, about 2.5 hours away, and that's where all the fertility specialists were. And so we were traveling during those 8 years back and forth, 2.5 hours each way, to a fertility specialist called named Dr. Neary. And to this day, I don't even know where Dr. Neary is, but I love that man, one of the kindest men I had ever met. He and his wife had to adopt 4 children, and that's why he specialized in infertility. He was able to go in there and do some surgeries through tumors and save my ovaries, save my uterus, save everything without just doing a hysterectomy, because he said they're functioning and I know how badly you want to have a baby, so I'm going to leave them. Well, then started fertility drugs. I don't know if any of you here have had to take those, but they're very costly. I see some heads shaking yes. Very costly, $50 a pill, and that was back in the 1980s, early 90s. And you had to take them 5 days and hopefully get pregnant. Well, took them for several months, several years, actually trying nothing. I had to go back to the doctor, and they would do testing to see what had happened. Well, they did some tests on me, and 5 eggs had dropped down from the fertility drugs. Now, that did not impact me like it should have until I went to school and told my special ed coordinator that 5 eggs had dropped down, but they weren't fertilized. And she said, whew. And I said, what? I would be so thankful. And she said, Teresa, 5 baby beds, 5 car seats, 5, and she started naming 5 of all these things. And I thought, whoa, I should have thought about that a little bit more. But I didn't have 5 babies, so I still didn't get pregnant. So then they started to do testing on my husband. And they tested him the same day. And my doctor, Dr. Neary, had hip replacement like me later on in life, but he was not there. And so he had a doctor taking his place. And it started with a V, and I can't even remember his name, nor do I really want to. He was not my friend. He was not like Dr. Neary. He sat across a desk from me, and he said, we have the test results back from your husband. We have all of your records. He said, you are not good candidates for in vitro or anything else. He said, in fact, and this is the part that I thought my husband would come across the desk and punch him out, and he didn't, and I couldn't understand that. But he said, in fact, I don't know any way possible that this man could have fathered the other 2 pregnancies. That's why I don't know his name. Don't like him. My husband didn't do anything, and we got in the car. This man said, you should just go home and be very thankful that you got to experience 2 pregnancies, because you're never going to have another one. And we got in the car, and we were crying, and I told my husband, I said, you know me. You know that I've been a Christian since the age of 9, and that I saved myself for marriage for you. I mean, I prided myself in that that's what God called me to do, and I did. And I said, you didn't punch him out. I said, he accused me of having an affair on you. Do you realize that? And he said, what? I said, did you hear what he said? And he said, no. He said, I was just still reeling from all the tests that they did on me. He said, my mind was 1,000 miles away. And he said, no. He said, do you want me to go back and punch him out? And I said, well, we're an hour away now, but, thanks for the thought after. So that was our experience. And that was in March of 1990. And in September, when I got on the bus to go sing, as usual, when I was pregnant, I felt like I had motion sickness, and I had to sit in the front seat of the bus, and I would hold a trash can in my lap all the way to the church or wherever we had to go, sometimes several hours. And then I'd get to the church and clean up and brush my teeth and put my clothes on and go sing. And I was used to doing that. Well, I started doing that again. And we had 2 other girls in the group, both wives of other people in our group, and they kept saying, go have a test. And for those of you who are shaking your head that you've been through infertility, back in those days, there were no tests to know, when you ovulate or all those good things that they have now that make it easier. You had to take your temperature before your head was even raised above the pillow. You had to mark it on a grid, and, you knew when your temperature went up, then that was, meant that was a good time to get pregnant. And so we went through, sorry, girls, you'll know about this stuff a lot later. But I had to keep those records for years, and then I would see that everything looked maybe like I was pregnant, and we all do it, go get a test, and it would be negative, and I would cry. Or, something would happen as a female, we all know, and I would cry. And so they kept telling me for weeks, go get a test, go get a test. You have all the symptoms. You've never been sick like that on the bus unless you were pregnant. Nope, not doing it. Not going to cry, not going to go through that again. Finally, it got a little bit obvious that I did need to go take a test, and sure enough, it was positive. Now, you all have seen several pictures of me, and I apologize for that big frizz ball of hair. That was early 90s. How many of you all had that, big hair, perms? Yeah? Yeah, too much perm in that hair right there. So I was pregnant, and I had always wanted a little girl. In fact, I had bought one of those really fancy headbands with all the flowers and the lace and really pretty, and stuck it in the bottom of my purse in a little bag. And when we went to have the ultrasound and it was a girl, my husband was a little disappointed, and I pulled out that bag with that headband and said, I've just been waiting for this. I love it, that it's a girl. And so you can go to the next slide. So here we are singing in all of our glory, since Deanna mentioned us, but that's when we traveled a lot and sang. And you can see still hairstyles and big hair, a lot of big hair going on in the 80s and early 90s. But in every service, I testified about the miracle of that pregnancy, of having 2 pregnancies that were not viable when I went to the doctor, and miscarriage, and all the things we went through with infertility. And I testified about the miracle that God had brought us with a little girl coming. And as Deanna said, a lot of shouting services over that, because a lot of people knew what we had been through for all those years, 11 years of just disappointment after disappointment. And so you can go to the next one, Matt. So that is the saddest day of my life, because, full term, 37 weeks, and she was stillborn. And so that was another crossword road for me. Even if he doesn't, what am I going to do about it? So the day that I went to the hospital when I wasn't feeling movement, which was 4 days before this picture, I knew I kept telling my husband, I haven't felt movement for a long time. And so we went to the hospital, and they had a nurse go into a room with me, and she put the Doppler on my stomach. And there was a huge clock, like that clock back there that I was looking at, just like that, but bigger. And it was 10 to 1 in the afternoon, and I remember distinctly. And this beautiful nurse, sweet as she could be, she kept trying to find a heartbeat. And I remember watching those minutes tick by, until 1 o'clock. For 10 minutes she tried. And she looked at me and with everything in her that she could muster, and she said, I'm really sorry. I'm going to go get the doctor. She said, I have a cold. I'm so stuffed up, and I just can't hear very well today. And as I lay there, I thought, but I don't have a cold. I'm not stuffed up. And I can't hear a heartbeat either. And so she left the room, and when she came back, she had brought my doctor with her. Dr. Lopez is his name. And he was dragging an ultrasound machine. And he stood here facing toward you. And I was laying in the bed, and she was over here. And he kept taking that wand for the ultrasound back and forth over my tummy. And every time he would take it across, he would let out a breath. And he would do it again. And he did it 8 times. And I was laying there thinking, I can see there's no blip on that screen. I've had an ultrasound before. I see there's no heartbeat. I know there's no heartbeat. Why isn't he telling me? And your brain goes through so many emotions. And I thought, maybe they think that it's better for the patient to say it. So I'm just going to say it. Dr. Lopez, there's no heartbeat, is there? She's gone, isn't she? And when he turned around, he was crying. Sorry. He was crying. And he said, no, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And they went to get my husband. And while they left, and my doctor had an emergency C-section that she had gotten him from, he was prepping for, to come and tell me that. And so when they were both gone, this nurse, her name was Sherry, like I said, she was beautiful, and she held my hand. And I said, I don't understand this, but I do know that there are floods of peace coming over me that I can't explain. I said, if you had told me this 11 years ago, that I would be in this place right now, I would have told you that you would be taking me to an institution because I'd be screaming. But I don't feel like screaming. I said, there's peace rolling over me, and God's telling me that it's going to be okay. She's not going to live, but it's going to be okay. He's got this. And she took my hand, and I remember she said, can I pray with you? She said, I'm a Christian. And she said, you're right, God's got this. She said, but can I just pray with you? And she prayed with me in that time. And that was so special to me. I didn't even know her last name. All I knew was her name was Sherry. And it just meant so much to me that she told me I'm a Christian too, and I know how to pray. And in that time, she was with me. And so I asked the doctor, my parents were living in Arizona at the time. My brother was living in Michigan, and my sister was in Columbus. And so they were all far away. And I knew that if I had her, it was my only chance to have a little girl and have pictures or have my family see her. And I know that sounds morbid, but it's not morbid when it's your baby. And so I said, can I just go home? He said that they were going to have to induce me. So I said, can I just go home and call my family and let them know if they want to be here, to give them time to be here. My parents are going to have to fly, obviously. And I said, I just want to give them enough time to be here. And he said, I don't want you to wait too long because of infection, but he said, we can wait until tomorrow. He said, what I want you to do is call me when you're on your way to the hospital, and I'll meet you there. And so I went home that night, and as I lay on the bed in the other room, I heard my husband on the phone. And Deanna will appreciate this because we were singing that morning, I don't know if you remember, for our pastor's 10th anniversary. And we had been booked because that was our home church. And as Deanna said, we were really loved there, and they wanted to surprise our pastor. So we had gone down and set up everything. I think the guys went down on Friday night and had it ready, but they wouldn't let the pastor in the church because they told him that they were decorating for their 10th anniversary. And so we were all set to sing. And I heard my husband on the phone say to the other girl that we sang with, call the church and tell them that we'll be back to get our equipment, but we're not going to be able to sing tomorrow. And something inside me said, this is your choice. This is your crossroads. This is where you have to make a decision. Are you going to go sing tomorrow and stand for God? Or are you going to lay in this bed and let the devil have a time that he can just put all kinds of things in your head? Are you going to start to become bitter Are you going to blame God in some way and think, why didn't he save my baby? Why do I have to go through this again? What's going on? And I remember yelling into the other room and saying, do not cancel that appointment. Do not. And my husband said, how in the world do you think you're going to stand up there, still pregnant, still 9 months, stand there and sing, knowing what's going on and that you're going to go to the hospital? At 6 o'clock, I'd planned to have this baby. And I said, you don't understand. I said, I have to show God that I'm going to serve him. I'm going to love him. I'm going to praise him. I'm going to always tell people how good he is, even if he doesn't. Even if he doesn't. And I have to tell the devil that I'm going to stand there and serve God and praise him and love him, even if he doesn't. Even if he doesn't heal him. And it wasn't me, folks. That was God in me. Trust me, because I don't have that kind of strength on my own. But we went and we sang, and people had heard. I mean, you know that game Telephone? It was like, they're singing. You won't believe what's happening. They're singing. She's singing. They're singing. And so I remember that the church was packed. I mean, there were people standing around the walls. And I looked back and I remember thinking, oh no, what have I done? But at the same time, I just felt God's strength so much with me. And it was such a time that I needed. I didn't just need to sing, but I needed those people in that church for that moment to pray for me. Not only was the altar lined for the invitation with people coming to give their hearts to the Lord, but also afterwards they had a special prayer for us and laid hands on us and prayed for us as we were getting ready to go to the hospital that night. And it meant so much. And every single thing that was done like that, just, do you all remember Popeye eating spinach? That's what it felt like to me. Like I'd opened a can of spinach, but it was God's spinach. And I was just strengthened, and I was just, ready. I was ready to do this. Now, I thought I would go to the hospital, and they would induce me, and by that night, I'd have a baby, and it would be over. Well, that's not how it goes when you're induced for labor. I don't know if any of you have been induced with a healthy baby, but they started at 6 o'clock that night, and it went through all that night, all day Monday, all day Tuesday, still being induced. But you know what? My doctor had encouraged me not to take 3 days, but to be induced, because he said the body, naturally needs to go through that process, and that he thought I would do better. That 3 days gave me time for people to come in and pray with me, encourage me, love on me. It gave me time to plan. I had a friend that had had this happen to her 13 years before, and when I left the hospital that Saturday to come back Sunday, we went straight to her house, and I said, Brenda, tell me everything that you wish you'd done. Tell me everything I need to do to be her mommy at that point when she's born. And she told me everything. She just filled my head with everything she could think of that she wished she'd done. At the time she had hers, they didn't let you hold them. They didn't let you dress them. They didn't even let you see them. She said, I screamed for 2 hours to see my baby until one nurse had compassion and said, I might lose my job over this, but I'm going to give you your baby. And she said, they let you hold him now. You hold her as long as you want to. You take pictures, and don't let anybody tell you that's morbid. She told me so many things to do that I now can share with other young women who unfortunately have to go through it. But she was such a help to me, and God was so real and so strong. At one point, my doctor said that I could have as many visitors as I wanted or as few as I wanted. And he said, make me the bad guy. If you get to the point where you're tired, have one of your family members come out and get me, and I'll come in and say, we need her to rest. I'm going to have to ask you all to leave. He said, don't you be the bad guy, because I don't want them mad at you. You make it me. And at one time, I had 32 people in my room. And my mom came over to me, and she's like, do you want me to get these people out of here? I'll go get Dr. Lewis. I was like, no, Mom. It's keeping my mind off of what I have to do. It's helping me. They're all encouraging me. I mean, they were singing Christian songs. It was a worship in that room. It was God all around us. It was just unimaginable during that time, and I'm so thankful for Christian friends. I'm so thankful that you ladies have each other here at the church, and Deanna and Scott, to be there when you're going through tough times and you have to make that decision. But even if he doesn't, what am I going to do about it? How am I going to live? Am I going to praise him, or am I going to be bitter? Because there are 5 stages of grief, and one of those stages is anger and bitterness. And I hadn't planned to say this, but I had to interpret a funeral at some one point, Olivia, and I'll never forget that the preacher said, even in the Bible, there are examples of people that were close to Jesus that had a little bit of questioning and wondering, like Mary and Martha, when Lazarus died, they were kind of blaming Jesus. Well, if you had been here, he might not have died. Do you remember that? And so I think God understands that, that sometimes we'll go through a little bit that we have to question, God, why me? I've said that a lot during those times. Why me? Why am I going through this? But God's always there, and we can't stay in that place too long. If you stay there too long, you'll continue. But if you start to look at the goodness of God and all the things that he's done for you in the past and how he hasn't failed you in the past, and you can trust in that, you'll be able to go on. And so my daughter's name was Canaan Summer Schweinsberg. Canaan just because we loved that name from the Bible, and Summer because I had a cousin that was named Katie Summer, and I always thought that was so pretty. And so the book is titled Canaan Summer, A Life Unlived. And I don't want to tell you all of the story because you're going to get a book today to read, but I do want to tell you that that's not the end of the story. Because remember I said my mom was a Christian and my dad was not. And my mom was the piano player of our church. She was a child soloist and very famous in our area. I've heard so many stories from people telling me about her walking the aisles of the church and singing in this big, strong voice. There's one recording of her when she was 4 years old in a church singing, and it's amazing. Can't believe how she just had this booming voice. And she's like this big. She's 4'11". So just to hear her, singing, but she stayed with God even though she married someone that wasn't a Christian, and she was sorry that she did that because she would take 3 of us to church every single Sunday by herself. But she always taught us about God and made sure we knew about God. My brother, he's in the middle. My sister's the youngest. I'm the oldest. My brother wanted to follow my dad because my dad was a coach, a really, good coach in every sport. My brother played every sport. He admired my dad, and when my mom would start to take us to church, my brother would say, "But can't I just stay with Dad?" That was his hero. He didn't understand, and my mom would say, "Nope, not as long as you're under my roof. You're going to church." And so she would take us all to church. We sat on the second row. Anybody have a mother that played piano? You did? Did you have to sit on the second row, first or second row? First, because she had to get to that piano quickly if they needed her, and so you were going to sit right there with her. When we got to be teenagers, we got to sit a little bit farther back, but then we'd get in trouble because she'd turn around and see us talking, and she'd be like. And so my brother always says that he had a drug problem because she drug him to church every single service, and he didn't want to go. More on that after lunch. But when Canaan was born and we got home, my mom and dad had flown in from Arizona and were staying with us. And my dad was out on the porch a lot. He wasn't in the house with all of us. And he just kept removing himself from the situation. And I went out to him and I said, "Dad, are you okay?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Well, what's going on?" And he said, "I just don't understand you." I said, "You don't understand me?" He said, "No." He said, "How can you go through this and smile when people come to the door? And you just seem like you just have peace about it. How can you have peace about it? How can you, not care that this has happened? And how come you're not mad at God?" And I said, "Dad, if you had Jesus in your heart, you would have peace like us. You'd be feeling what we're feeling." And he said, "Well, I just don't understand it." He said, "I grew up in church, but I just don't understand, when, my granddaughter died. I can't be like you. I don't know how you're doing it." And so that was the beginning. And to make a long story short, they flew back to Arizona on July 7th. She was born May 7th. They flew back July 7th, and on July 8th, I had to call them and tell them to come back to Ohio because my dad's dad had passed away. He had a massive heart attack, and he was caring for my grandmother who had Alzheimer's and was bedridden and pretty much nonverbal. And he had a massive heart attack sometime in the night or early morning and had fallen across her legs, and she had laid there with him until the caregiver came that morning to give her a bath and found him. And so I had to call and tell him to come home. And, again, I watched my dad. I come from a Christian family on his side of the family, and we were all at peace. My grandfather was a wonderful Christian man, and so was my grandmother, Christian woman. And he was the superintendent of our church. He was just a godly man. And I watched my dad again, and he was so destroyed and so upset. And all of us were thinking about my grandfather in heaven. And there's a part in the book that I won't share with you, but I really want you to read. But the night that my grandfather passed away, I had a dream, and it was about him entering heaven and seeing Canaan. And that's just given me peace all these years because of thinking that he's there holding her for me and taking care of her. And so that gave me comfort. I didn't even cry when my grandfather passed away. My dad said, "How are you not crying? You're his favorite. You were the first grandchild. You're the closest to him." And I said, "Dad, it's that peace that only God can give. It's the peace that passes all understanding." He didn't understand. He didn't have it. And so he was left from Arizona. My mom flew back to go back to work, and my dad was left to care for my grandmother. And so he stayed with her. And one night my mom called me, and she said, "Teresa, I think something's happened with your dad." And I said, "What?" And she said, "I think he got saved." She said, "He just talks different. He's different." I said, "Did you ask him?" And she said, "No." And I said, "I'll ask him." I have no problem. I've been praying for him for 29 years, and I'm going to ask him. And so I called him at my grandmother's house, and I said, "Dad, Mom said that you're really different. She thinks you got saved. Did you get saved?" There was a long pause. And then I heard him start sniffling, sobbing, and he said, "Yes." And that was just from May to, I think that was August when I made that call. And I said, "Well, tell me about it." He said, "Well, that whole time you keep coming out and talking to me on the porch at your house after, we knew that Canaan had died." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "That just really bothered me, that I didn't have that same peace, that I didn't have peace like you all to cope with it." And he said, "And then Papa died." He said, "I didn't have peace again, and everybody else did." He said, "I was sitting here," and he said, "Mom started like wheezing and gasping for breath." And he said, "I just thought if she dies while I'm here, I just can't do it. I just can't." He said, "Because I didn't have that peace." He said, "I just started praying, God, I know I don't have any right to ask anything of you because my heart's not right." He said, "So now I want to ask you, Lord, come into my heart and save me. Forgive me of all my sins, because I need to ask you to help my mom right now. Help her not to gasp for her breath. Just don't let her die right now, Lord. Just give her peace and let her sleep easily tonight." And he said his mom just went and just fell back to sleep and just slept the rest of the night. It was so peaceful. And he said, "I knew that I was saved because God had answered my prayer." He gave me the assurance that he had answered my prayer. So I have spoken over a little bit, Deanna, but I'm going to tell you more of the story after lunch, but I wanted to end with that happening, and you're going to hear a lot more things that happened because of a little baby named Canaan. So I hope you all will stick around to hear like Paul Harvey says, the rest of the story.